In August of 2024, we headed north to Canada. Join us for Part 5, the final episode of our Grand Loop tour of British Columbia, as we finish the last leg of our trip around the province. Brought to you by Occidentalist Outdoors. After finishing up the Alaska Highway, we found a camp on yet another quiet lake. We stayed a couple of days and just enjoyed some paddling time on the water. We also found ourselves on a lake with plenty of evidence of fish. These little guys weren't exactly what we were looking for, but they were a good sign. We found a lot of willing biters on this lake. Pike minnow wasn't the fish we were really after, but they still provided some good entertainment. Sometimes just having a lake all to yourselves is all you really need out of the day. We hit the road and moved south, and yes, another day, another lake to paddle. We were back in a rhythm. Drive, set up camp, paddle, repeat. It didn't get old. On this particular lake, the trout were rising to flies, which made for a pretty fun afternoon. This beaver was taking time off from dam building to enjoy a dinner of lily pads. Back on the road again. Driving south along the Canadian Rockies is like driving through a postcard. While Mud Lake definitely lives up to its name, the name doesn't give you any idea of the view you'll see when you get there. Southern BC has several inland ferries to carry you across rivers and lakes. Our first ferry on this trip has to be the smallest one, with a capacity that appeared to max out at 2 vehicles. Our second passage was across Upper Arrow Lake on a slightly larger ferry. We had a front row seat. There was no charge to ride the inland ferries in British Columbia. The views, however, are priceless. Ferry rides for the day complete, it was time to find a camp for the night. How about a lake? I'm figuring you already predicted that. But to truly leave the crowds behind, sometimes you have to navigate some rough roads first. This would end up being our last British Columbia recreation site, and as was pretty typical on our trip, we had this last site and the entire lake to ourselves for our 2-day stay. We did get some of our only rain of the trip at this last stop, but that just added some nice clouds and fog to the mountains that were towering above the lake to round out the Northwoods feel here. We observed and listened to loons on every lake we camped out across British Columbia. It's a sound I'll never tire of. Our time in BC was coming to a close, and a quiet lake surrounded by mountains seemed like the way to end a perfect trip. The next morning, it was one more ferry ride across Kootenay Lake before we made our way to the border crossing and headed for home. Thanks for joining us on the final segment of our Grand Loop Tour of British Columbia. If you enjoyed these videos, please subscribe to the channel so we can meet again on our next adventure. Until then, we'll see you on the trail.